I had a lot of final thoughts that I noticed we'd accumulated about spring football, and we hadn't put it all out on tape. So just a couple of thoughts on several teams here. Alabama post-spring. I know everyone's focused on the quarterback battle. I am too, but I'm actually more confident in how that quarterback battle will turn out than I am right now the offensive line situation. I'm not going as far as to say I think it's going to be a weakness or anything. It's just a bigger question mark to me because I think both of those quarterbacks are guys they can win with. I don't know what to expect from them on offensive line. Now, what they are not void of is talent. So they're really, really talented players there. There's just lack of experience. They're replacing nearly the entire thing. They replaced their offensive line coach. So you're starting basically from scratch there. And then you add in that, we're trying to figure out how to run the ball there. And then you add in that you're going to have a new quarterback, no matter who it is, start for them. So that's on the offensive side. I also think Ryan Coleman Williams now, added a name. I think he'll have a good year this year. I don't have any question about him mentally, work ethic. In fact, that's never been a question with Ryan Williams. He just dipped last year, had problems with drops. So I think he'll be good this year based on everything that I picked up out of spring. Linebacker is one of the bigger questions on that team. Now, if you talk to their staff, they thought linebacker would be a question last year. But due to injury the previous year, a lot of guys came back for 2025 that they didn't expect to have. And so you just kind of deferred the questions a year. Caleb Woodson walked in there from Virginia Tech and is immediately penciled in. He earned it, but penciled in as a starter. And outside of that, got a lot of guys that could be. There's a lot of could be there. I think probably what was happening there in the spring is you've inevitably got some guys in your room that you hope take the next step. But in the moment in time, they're not the highest performers. At their best, they would be better than anyone in the room. But sometimes, your position group, in this case, Bama's linebacker group, maybe you got some guys who have lower ceilings who are putting better practice tape out there than the guys with the higher ceilings. That's what God invented spring for. I think they dealt with that a little bit, and therefore that linebacker group's still kind of a work in progress. They got the longest secondary, I think, in the league. One of the best secondaries in the country, I think, potential-wise this year. But certainly length-wise, I don't think there's another DB group that looks like Alabama. That's where I am on them. Move it to Coral Gables. Move it to South Florida, not the University of. Miami coming out of spring has me convinced that at their high end, this can be a better team than last year. Miami's got that 20-teens Bama vibe to them. Kirby, Georgia, Ryan Day, Ohio State, the kind of vibe where they've become an exception to the rule. The rule in college football is when you have a really good team and then there's a ton of lost production off that team, it's going to be a steep climb to recreate what that previous team created. But Saban's Alabama, Kirby's Georgia, Ryan Day's Ohio State, those are outfits that have just defied conventional wisdom. And you learn that the guys that are waiting in the wings there are sometimes better than seasoned veterans on other rosters. Miami, at least this year, I think could be in position to be that. Not the least of which reasoning is tied to the quarterback position. I expect them to upgrade at quarterback. I expect Darian Mensah to be an upgrade at the quarterback position relative to what Carson Beck gave them last year. And I get to tie that to what could be an extremely high level wide receiver group. They are going to be very good running the ball. And offensive line, while there's a lot of departing experience, really both sides up front, they have entered into that territory where it may take a few weeks to find its groove, but just the question marks could become strengths. Miami has question marks that could become strengths. I also don't want to overlook that Shannon Dawson and Corey Heatherman are one of the best OC-DC combos in college football right now. And they're both there. I don't think they thought Shannon Dawson would be around this long down there. I thought they believed he'd already get at least like a G5 level head coaching spot. And he was in the mix for him last year. But he's back another year, and truth be told, he has a quarterback that much more perfectly complements his offensive style. Ohio State, coming off another playoff appearance. Ohio State at various points last year was thought to be the runaway best team in the country. They ended up not winning the Big Ten championship game. They ended up being one and done in the playoffs. And it kind of makes you forget how you felt about them. as late as mid-November. As late as mid-November, they were looked at as the slam dunk number one team in the country, and they're going to face Indiana. Yeah, we know that game's coming. Well, the game did happen, and it was what it was. I don't want to make any excuses. So as far as this year, they're going to be right back in the mix. They're going to be one of the favorites to win it all. I think the biggest question, or one of the biggest questions I'd have about them coming out of spring is, how good is Julian Sayin at his best? And his best is not going to show up, all due respect, against Purdue or Minnesota. I need to see him on the road against Texas. I need to see him when they play Indiana. I need to see him maybe against like an Oregon Big Ten championship game or in a playoff situation against A&M or Miami or someone like that. And I need to see him be the reason they win a game. Now, maybe, just maybe, Matt Patricia's defense is good enough, or maybe their run game is good enough where they can, for lack of a better term, hide him in big games. That's not realistic. In postseason college football, that's not realistic. So I'm not saying he can't do it. That's why it's a question, not a weakness. But I still think there's a leveling up to his game that has to happen in those big moments. The wide receiver room will be good enough there. They got the best in college football, probably the best player in college football, not just wide receiver. But even behind them, like you got Chris Henry there. You got a lot of players. Brandon Ennis is there. You got a lot of players. The offensive line returns 80% of its starters, translation 4 out of 5. So they'll be good. Running back will be good. Defensive tackle, I'd circle as a little bit of a question, maybe an unknown for them, but that schedule's rough. That schedule's no joke. And so you'll find out early on because you get to see him at Texas in week 2. But the beauty of that is you got a trip to Texas in week 2, and then they'll be off the radar for a week, and then they'll play Illinois at home, and then they'll go to Iowa. But eventually, you've got this team playing Indiana, you got this team playing USC, you got this team playing Oregon, at Nebraska, Michigan. Not an easy draw. All right, what about Georgia? We're going to hear from Kirby Smart later in the show. He's not joining the show, at least not this week, but we will hear sound from him later in the show. Kirby Smart and Georgia entering 2026. Same kinds of questions that I feel like I've had about him for a few years at wide receiver. How dynamic can that position group be at its best? I don't need it to be top 5 in the country. That's unrealistic. But I do need game-changing, game-breaking potential. That's what these teams that end up making it deep in the playoffs have. I don't know that they have that. I don't know maybe that the dominant pass rusher is there on this team. Maybe it will be, maybe it won't be. Those are questions I have coming out of spring. Now, the defense overall will be legit. Defensively overall, this will be one of the best outfits in the country. KJ Bolden, maybe the best safety in the country. But the quarterback position here is a known commodity. Gunnar Stockton is a known commodity. But remember, we were talking to Pollock the other day about this very thing because his opinion was for Georgia to win a national championship, Gunnar Stockton has to be better than he's been. They can't win a national championship with him merely performing at the level he did last year. All right, so let's say that's true. Let's say that argument's true. I think a lot of people would agree with that. How much better does he need to be, A? And then B, how realistic is it to expect significant improvement in Gunnar Stockton's game? Because I'm telling you how he strikes me. He strikes me as a player who's very good, but kind of a known commodity. Now, it's weird because normally it's like your third year starting when people are talking about you like that. Well, Gunnar Stockton's not a 3-year starter. Last year was his first year starting. So I've kind of got this internal battle just in my own mind of, do I leave room in my expectation bucket at least? Do I leave room for this significant scaling up of output? Or do I want to choose to be pleasantly surprised if that happens and make my expectation for him just a little bit more of what we had last year? And by the way, what we had last year wasn't bad. It was very good. It was good enough for him to win the SEC championship. So we're talking about the difference here, splitting hairs a little bit, the difference in what kind of upgrade they would need to win the whole thing, to compete to win the whole thing. Flip the paper over. Quick 5-second timeout. Check and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It keeps it free. We love you. All right, back to the show. Texas, University of. Some more questions here coming out of spring football. Texas, I would say my impression of them coming out of spring is that team has the highest ceiling of any team in college football this upcoming year, with a great big asterisk on that, and it's tied to the offensive line. Offensive line holds the key. It always does in this sport. It does especially at Texas because outside of that, there aren't a ton of major questions. There are no weaknesses. There are very few like major questions relative to the rest of college football. So Cam Coleman coming in there, I expect an All-American caliber year from him. In the words of Steve Sarkisian, Ryan Wingo's still here, which is a really, really good, just noteworthy point about Texas football. But outside of that, the overhaul they did to that running back room with Raleek Brown, Hollywood Smothers, also Rasheem Biles coming in there at linebacker, just like an immediate captain-type player defensively for them. They're good to great pretty much everywhere from a potential standpoint. The offensive line holds the key because you can visualize just as easily as I could Arch having a really good year, tailbacks having a really good year, wide receivers making some wow plays, but then they go up against a Miami or the equivalent of last year's Miami, if there is that, this year, and they just get caved. Or they just go up against Georgia again, and they finish second best physically on the field against Georgia, and you're looking and you're saying, man, all those portal moves, all that hype, and the balloon gets popped in our face again by the same meat and potatoes approach that has beat us, it seems like, for a long time. Those are the questions. Because if those questions are answered in the affirmative, Texas will win the national championship. That's pretty cut and dry to me. LSU. Lane Kiffin, I don't know if you've heard. Lane Kiffin entering his first year as head coach at LSU. So Trey'Dez Green is going to be a monster for them, physically and literally, and could very well be their leading pass catcher this year. In fact, I don't know if we necessarily want to go down the prop bet odds road on that, but I'd bet on it. But outside of him, a lot of questions on this team. Same deal with LSU. Question doesn't mean weakness. Question means question. So Sam Leavitt, the injury kept him out most of spring. I think right at the end he got some reps. But that plus an entire offensive overhaul to me means even if I'm Lane Kiffin, even if I'm Charlie Weiss Jr., I'm coming out of spring, and there's no way even I have a firm grip on who we're going to be. So there's certainly no way some guy who was sitting behind a microphone in Nashville could know that. I was listening to Kiffin talk the other day. He was like, yeah, I mean, we've had a quarterback out most of spring. We got a bunch of new pieces. We've barely tackled. How in the world can you know what kind of football team you have? You can't. But since it's impossible to have a great feel, that's not a bad thing. It makes it fun because there's this whole range of outcomes here. Now, my younger self would base my expectations on their high-end potential, which means 10-2, 11-1, I'm feeling it. The not older, but the more seasoned version of me, yeah, I'm going to say, all right, let's go into summer thinking 8-4. Let's see if we can talk ourselves up to 9-3. Maybe post-media days when fall camp's starting, maybe we get crazy like we did with Nebraska last year, and we roll a 10-2 out there, and the world burns down. So I was looking at Shea Dixon's work, and Shea Dixon tends to believe, Jesse, they're going to start a couple of true freshmen on the interior of the defensive line. Now, these are not normal true freshmen. Gerald and Anderson, the latter of whomst, is one of the biggest names to come out of high school in Louisiana in a long time. They're both top 10 defensive linemen from this past year's class. But both of them, are they starting on the interior of the defensive line for LSU? And does that make it a weakness, or does it just make it a fun note? Let's keep an eye on that. Oregon, coming out of spring, my lasting thoughts on Oregon. This team has excellent high-end talent. This team is poised to make a run at a national championship. They may very well have the best quarterback in the country. They may have the best and certainly deepest defensive line in the country. You could make the argument that they could challenge for having the number one wide receiver room in the country. I think conservatively it's a top 5 secondary, potentially. And don't believe the lack of hype around special teams coming out of the spring game. They'll be okay there too. They did not go to the portal on offensive line. Notice that. It's something we pointed out going into spring and something I feel needs to be restated coming out of spring. They're replacing 3 of 5 on the offensive line. And if Oregon wanted to, Oregon could have gone to the portal to backfill there. They didn't. Why is that? It's not because they're broke. It's because obviously they trust their pieces internally. Now, that's no guarantee that they're right, but it is a guarantee that's how they feel. New offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator there. Just keep that in mind. Not new to the building, but new in those roles. So just keep that in mind. Bradley, you got their schedule? Yeah, there you go. No, those are the odds. My bad. It was so close. So close. They open with Boise. They go to Oklahoma State, Portland State. So the first time, I would guess the first time the world will be watching them is week 4 at USC. Okay, and they don't play someone that you would consider their physical equal until the first week of November when they go to Columbus, Ohio. And they got Michigan the very next week. That's a nice little 1-2 punch. I didn't remember that. They got Ohio State and Michigan back-to-back, no bye week there. So I think Oregon will win the national title this year. However, that is sort of a backloaded schedule there, which is good news, especially when it comes to things like the offensive line, because you can get your act together. Texas A&M just lost. Oh, sorry, Bradley, I'll give you time to change the assets there. Texas A&M just lost 10 players to the draft, which would mean in the modern age of college football, boy, you're going to have to take a step back this year. And look, I need to see Marcel Reed's floor rise a little bit, meaning him at his worst needs to be way more consistent than it was last year. But if I get that, they don't have to take a step back at all. Texas A&M does not have to take a step back. I'm going to give you an example. I think that offensive line situation is a perfect sort of microcosm for the team. So the offensive line loses 4 or 5. Conventional wisdom in college football tells us, boy, you lose 4 or 5 on your offensive line, you're in trouble. They may be better than they were last year there. They may be. They have the potential to be that. Because while there may be a bunch of question marks on the offensive line, you don't have a bunch of weaknesses. You're not with a lack of option. In fact, they probably got 8 or 9 guys that they could throw out there and play right now. It's just that it's unsettled. And it may still be a little bit unsettled in the latter portion of fall camp. Do the schedule thing again, Bradley. It may be that it takes a few weeks. But I think once they settle into their rhythm this year, once they go to LSU, let's say in week 4, there's a chance that you're looking at offensive line at Texas A&M going, dude, they replaced 4 or 5 on the offensive line. This doesn't look like a weakness on a team. This kind of looks like a strength of a team. It obviously all comes back to quarterback, but offensive line is going to be fun to watch with them because I kind of think of it as this microcosm of Mike Elko's Texas A&M as a whole, where they're going to pump out draft picks. This is not an anomaly. This last year, them having 10 deep in the draft, that's not an anomaly. That'll continue happening. Maybe not quite at that clip every year, but it'll continue happening. But then what you'll also condition yourself to be ready to do is watch them put a bunch of guys in the draft and then go ahead and look over at spring football and say, wow, they're going to be good again this year, aren't they? Yeah, that's them. As long as they're acquiring talent like they are and developing it, that's them for the foreseeable future.